Most importantly, you guys look great. How's my hair? Please be honest.
Your hair's awesome.
Thank you. And I are going to get along great, not just because I'm going to drop your name to get out of speeding tickets. That's not, that's, I don't get tickets. I'm being serious. Pulled over. Don't use this against me. 7 times in the last 3 years. They feel so sorry for me every time because I'm so clueless. Like with the bus lane thing, never understood why no one else drove in that on the freeway because it was wide open. And the guy's just always like, no one can be that dumb. You don't need a ticket.
Do they feel sorry for you because of your hair or?
But you said
I love her.
You said my hair looked good. We do want to thank you both for being here today. Deputy Chief Tingirides, recently promoted to Deputy Chief, which is pretty impressive.
Big deal.
And then we have Captain Espinoza. We appreciate you both being here. Tell us a little bit about the CSP program.
The Community Safety Partnership Program, it actually started in 2011. And it was created to really put an emphasis on police officers building relationships and working in communities that had a high volume of crime and a lack of relationship with law enforcement. But what was different about this program was a nonprofit organization went out into the community and they did an assessment and surveys of the community and asked the community what they would like to see. If we placed officers in these communities for a 5-year period, what do you want to see from them? What are your needs? And based upon doing those surveys and that outreach, a blueprint of the community was created. And then we selected officers who had the ability to articulate passion and compassion and empathy, and officers who grew up in a community like the ones we were going to serve, who really found it in their heart to do this type of policing. So we set out wanting officers to build relationships, such as the mayor's gang reduction and youth development program, nonprofit organizations, the schools, and collaboratively having a public health approach to addressing some of the crime and the mistrust in the community. When we started the program, what we realized really quickly was relationships were built after we were willing to listen and understand and have empathy for the community. And when we built these relationships and started working alongside each other, we saw a decrease in violent crime.
Wonderful. Adrian, you want to?
Can you tell us just a little bit about your background of how your upbringing was? I think you were born to a single mother, and sort of just your upbringing and why you got into law enforcement in the first place?
So that is correct. And I was born in the 70s, and I never thought of Watts as anything but being beautiful. And I was born to a single parent. My mom had me when she was 15 years old, very challenging for her. But one of the amazing things about my family and about my mom was that we persevered. And my mother taught me very early on never to give up and to always give back and make a difference in other people's lives. And we were fortunate enough, I would call it fortunate enough, right at the time that the gang epidemic increased and street crime increased and the sale of narcotics increased. We moved out of Watts in 1979, 1980. And I remember growing up through my teenage years, seeing what gangs and drugs did to the community and what law enforcement's response was to that. And shortly after the 1992 Rodney King incident, I knew that I needed to give back to my community, and my dream was to go back to the community I grew up in and make a difference and make change. And I was blessed enough to be able to do that, especially with the Community Safety Partnership Program.
Captain Espinoza, let me ask you. The deputy chief was speaking about collaboration between the police and the community. Give us a couple of examples of that. What are some specific things that an officer who is in the program assigned to one of these communities, what's a typical day for them? How are they collaborating with the community specifically?
So one of the things, and we're fairly new as far as building up the Bureau, but the expectation has been that the officers assigned to the program actually have the foresight and the emotional intelligence to be in the community, available and present within those parameters of the development that they're working in, on foot, and talking to the residents in that community on a non-traditional law enforcement level. So getting to know who the community members are and listening and being patient and letting them do the talking about what their feelings are about the police and how they feel we're doing our job, and take that information or criticism and use it to start a dialogue about how we can make change together. It's an approach that's a little multifaceted because they still have the responsibility of being, police officers, right? And they will take enforcement action if it's necessary. So we're not saying that we're not serving, the city in our traditional role. We are. So we're here to stay the course and to really impact those neighborhoods and really get to know the people that live there, and then hone in our own skills and skill sets and awareness about how the community wants to be policed.
As you're describing the program, and it would be interesting, I don't even know if it's a possibility at some point to be able to go and join one of the officers. I got the thumbs up, so we're heading in.
It would be very interesting, for sure.
Yes. I mean, I did that once, actually, for real, when I was in college, but I was required to do it to stay in school, so I didn't enjoy it as much.
Now you'll be required to do it to stay in business.
Right. But I love what you guys are doing, because as you're describing it, as Captain Espinoza was describing it, and when Deputy Chief, when you're talking about a collaboration, I've got to believe that a lot of people who live in these communities, their actual either hands-on only experience seeing police come in, or what they've heard from relatives or friends and seen on TV is a wailing siren and police getting out to take action, whether it's justified, and maybe it's to protect someone in the community, but their natural reaction is that is a sight, a visual, a sound, that something really bad went down or is about to go down. And what you guys are doing is assimilating the police into the everyday community so that there can be we're together. We're working through, and I love that as you're describing it. One of the reasons Adrian joins us for a lot of the podcasts, her husband is a police officer. And I know that, why don't you tell us about, your own take watching everything? Let's be honest, no secret, the country is in turmoil over race relations, tensions between police and even people's own opinions on police. I mean, literally, it's I can't look at social media because in my own community, people who have been friends for years are at each other's throat over everything from the protests to the riots to the individual cases to the police and whether to defund and what people feel. It's so heated, and most people don't have the right information. They don't have the right temperament for these discussions, and I call them couch ninjas. They sit there and live their life on Facebook and Instagram commenting instead of going into a useful means. But talk about it from your perspective and what you've seen in your family.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I think everyone is aware that your jobs just in general are very difficult and dangerous all the time. But in today's current times, I think even more so, right, with everything that's going on. And, for my husband, I know, it's been difficult for our family because he takes a lot of pride in his job. And, he's staying very strong, but it's hard to see a lot of people, posting on, what's it called, tagging on buildings, all cops are pigs, all cops are bastards. We have a Twitter video of an officer standing guard, and protesters are just screaming.
Let's watch that video. So
have you seen this?
Let's play this for a second and show everyone, and then we're going to want you guys to comment on it.
You a fucking hoe, bitch. You a bitch ass. Take your fucking gun, bitch.
I mean, they're just taunting him. They're taunting him. This man is doing his job. They're taunting him. And of course, you know, with everything that's going on, people are very passionate. People are very heated. Of course, there's a purpose for these marches and everything. But, you know, it's hurtful to see images like that, and especially for your position, you guys have given so much. I know my husband gives so much, and it's just difficult.
Let me ask you, and then I want to ask the officers. I remember when you sent that to me, when you texted that to me, it really rocked you, and I can see that it's taking its toll now. You have your brother is black, and yet your husband is an officer. And so, I mean, I think that you have a very good perspective on things. How did that make you feel when you see that? What would you say to people who...
Well, I think just like I said, now it's very difficult to watch that, no matter who it is, if he's in uniform or not, to have any person taunting in someone else's face, you know, any sort of violence is hard to watch. But yeah, to Drew's point, my husband is a police officer. I do have a brother and other family members who are black. It's just very difficult to watch. And yeah, it can be conflicting for people. You know, like Drew said, oftentimes you see on social media, it's either one way, you're with the cops and you're against Black Lives Matter, or it's the total other way. And it's very difficult to have a conversation when people are so sided.
How did you both feel? Was that the first time you've seen that, or have you guys seen that video? It was
No.
so it
First time.
Yeah.
First time.
Yeah.
Okay. It was on Twitter, but I mean, what do you guys now? If you couldn't hear, and this is why I said it just goes on for the same thing. They were taunting the black officer and had their hands right up to his face. He was holding very steady. You have to give that officer just so much credit and respect for that. They were calling him a bitch. They were using the P word. I don't think I have to spell out the entire word over and over again. And, you know, essentially saying to him that he's betraying his own people by being in uniform, protecting. What goes through your minds as you watched that and saw that officer standing there having to deal with that?
Very difficult to watch. Very proud of his demeanor, and his demeanor doesn't reflect what the narrative is right now across the country. He was very poised, he was very patient, and he didn't react in a demeaning or physical way towards the anger that was being spewed in his face. Not to mention the safety aspect of it, that lighter being put in his face that could be utilized as a weapon. And I gotta tell you, I understand the hurt and some of the anger that's echoing across this country. What happened to George Floyd was horrible and very difficult to watch. And there's been other incidents that have occurred across this country that triggers your soul and makes you just say, that's not right. And our response to incidents like that has to be balanced. And part of being balanced is listening and understanding both sides. And when no officer gets dressed and comes to work so that someone can stand in front of him and berate him and yell at him and demean him. And then the opposite of that is protesters will say, well, no black man deserves to walk down the street and get shot and killed by a police officer. I think what we all have to understand and what we all have to start doing is humanizing one another, understanding one another. And that's what the CSP program is about. In order for us to understand that hurt and that anger, we have to understand our history. I'm going on my 26th year with the LAPD. Giselle's going on her 27th year with the LAPD. I've never been involved in an officer-involved shooting. I've gotten many guns off of people. Giselle's never been involved in an officer-involved shooting. But the narrative is we're all shooting and killing Black men in the community. And one incident is too much. I definitely agree. But we have to be willing to sit down at the table in a respectful manner on both sides and come up with solutions. And destroying our communities and berating each other is not the answer.
I think, something that Adrian said a moment ago, and that was very well said, Deputy Chief, was that most people, and this is why we're in the situation of not getting anywhere and tensions escalating more and more, instead of finding solutions, is it's very one-sided and black and white for most people. And you look at their responses where and I've heard this, is that, this happened, so of course this makes perfect sense. It's the only option. And there's nowhere to go from there. To your point, there's very few people, certainly very few human beings, as I would define a human being, who could look at the George Floyd video and not believe that there is something pure evil about what that officer did to that man. I won't go any further. I've even said to other people in regular conversation, I said, look, use that as a litmus test. Say, hey, do you think what happened there was wrong, was murder? And if someone doesn't agree that that's what that was, great, then you're eligible to be the next Grand Wizard of the Klan. Because if you don't think that was murder, vicious and wrong and evil on every level, then there's no room at the table for that type of discussion at that point. The problem is that anything that is in between, most people are not willing to discuss. It becomes, defund the police, a very big hot button. What we've realized, and what I found having other guests on this program, is 99% of all people who are arguing about defunding the police, all of these Facebook ninjas on the couches and all this, they don't even truly know what that means. When really what that even talks to. People are thinking that means that the police will no longer exist, that you will shut down the police force. They don't even realize that the meaning behind defunding the police, whether you're for it or against it, which is a whole different topic, has to do with the amount of funds that go into certain types of programs that might have a certain level of emphasis versus programs that are more community oriented. So people aren't even aware of what they're talking about, but they are vehemently fighting, and this is where it has to be. And to your point, and the community safety program, there has to be a starting point. There has to be a discussion. There has to be a civil conversation. You have to bring people to the table and say in person, we didn't come into your community today to shoot anyone 7 times in the back, like with the Jacob Blake case. We didn't come into your community today to drive someone's knee into someone's throat for 8 minutes and 46 seconds because someone thinks that maybe they passed a $20 counterfeit bill. That's not why we're here. We're here to say, what can we do for you? And that's what's so amazing about this program, and why I hope people hear about it, and I hope it catches on. I'm
just curious to know, like, when you are out in the community, especially after, this year, recent events, what is the sort of the tone and the reaction that you're getting from community?
That's a great question. And I something that doesn't get talked a lot about is the officers and them feeling so unsupported and not understood. And as a leader, trying to keep those officers motivated and to really look at what they're doing and remembering their mission to protect and serve. And the first couple of days of the civil unrest, I know Giselle was working 6 at night to 6 in the morning. I was working 6 at night to 6 in the morning. And a lot of what we did was have conversations with these officers. And a lot of them saying, I don't know what to do. We don't feel supported. No one believes us. No one trusts us. And I remember having conversations with some of the younger officers saying, especially in South Los Angeles and East LA, take a look around. Look at the community you're working in right now. We haven't had not one window store broken in Watts or South LA. We haven't had any civil unrest protests where there's a destruction of property. And there are people driving up and down the street, honking and waving at us, giving us the thumbs up and telling us, keep your heads up. And we have to remember that a lot of the voices and a lot of the concern that's being talked about across the country, some of those voices, the real community voices, aren't even coming through. It's getting drowned out by activists. And I can tell you in Watts, I got so many phone calls. I had phone calls from the community who said, we're going to drive down to your station and park our cars, and we're going to stand in front of it to make sure nobody touches it, to make sure nobody even throws a rock at it. And these were ex-gay members, people from the community who called to check on us to see how we were doing. And so we have to keep things in perspective, and the officers are appreciated. They do decide to become a police officer because they want to give back. And there's a huge community out there that supports us and needs us and wants us there. We have to look at the training across this country and ensure that every law enforcement organization has an emphasis on reverence for human life and de-escalation. And what does that look like? And how do we humanize each other? And at the end of the day, that person that we came in contact with wants to go home to their family, just like that police officer wants to go home to his or her family.
Captain Espinoza.
Giselle.
Yes, I agree. And to your point about some people are at home not knowing what defunding the police really means. And also going back to what the chief just mentioned about some of our community stepping up and wanting to make sure we were okay. That has been my experience in the short time that I have been with the Community Safety Partnership Bureau, is I have gone into multiple communities throughout the city, and the information we've gotten and the feedback we've gotten is that the people that were in downtown LA protesting and looting and rioting and committing crimes do not represent them. So one thing we have to also consider is that we're a huge department. Los Angeles Police Department is about 10,000 strong, not including our civilian employees. So we have evolved. We've learned from our mistakes. We have been proactive in improving not just the way we do our work, but also showcasing the good work that our officers do. And that's been a little challenging because most of our police officers do the work because they want to do the work and they don't care about getting the credit. So the image of the police department right now, we are carrying what is happening in other smaller cities outside of our state. And it is my opinion that somehow, some way, we have to be consistent at the national level on the expectation of policing everywhere, not just in Los Angeles, because we are bigger and we are, I'd like to say, more experienced because we have more people, we've had more incidents in comparison to a smaller city in a small town outside of California. But I do think there has to be some consistency on the national level on the expectations. And people also need to understand that we have very different laws. California law is not like Minnesota law. It's not like, you know, the laws in New York. They're different. Our use of force policies are very different, and they're consistent with what the public is asking for. So we don't all function under the same guidelines. And that's probably one of the reasons why we have been so successful in some of the things that we have tried to improve, because we're not perfect, but we're pretty perfect at trying to get better.
But let me ask you this, and maybe this is a controversial question to ask a deputy chief and a police captain, but you seem like very open and direct, so I'm going to throw it out. there are some bad apples in any police department. Would you not agree that there are? I mean, we certainly saw, I struggle to pronounce his name. I don't really want to anyway, but the former officer with his knee in George Floyd's neck.
Chauvin.
Chauvin. I don't think anyone thinks that was an isolated case. He could not have, we've seen this. So what does LAPD do specifically to first and foremost assure people that you're aware and you're looking within, because you can't find the bad apples if you don't look internally? That's where they would be. And what is LAP doing? What do you guys do to not just say, okay, the problem's out there, we know we have to communicate better, we know that there's other tactics we could use out there. What can we do internally to make sure that the next Chauvin and George Floyd is not in LAPD territory? Hopefully nowhere, but what are those things that you can reassure people about?
That's a great question, and you started off with a true statement. You said bad apples, and that's so true. There's a lot of bad apples in every career. There's bad doctors, there's bad lawyers, there's bad police officers, there's bad teachers. I think what's so compelling about our bad apple is we are entrusted to enforce the law, and we can take a life or breathe life into someone. And that's what makes us different, and the expectation of us different. And so the LAPD has multiple systems in place to assess our police officers and look for early warning signs. First and foremost, it starts with our leadership. And our leaders have to understand our policies and our procedures and our training. Training is so key and critical. And that starts with our use of force policy and our de-escalation and our reverence for human life, and having less lethal tools like beanbag and OC spray. Training is huge in that. When you train a police officer, let's be honest, you can come on the job at 21 years old. Your brain is still developing until you're 26 years old. And so you're teaching a 21, 22-year-old to respond to a domestic violence incident when he's probably barely had one or two girlfriends in his life and still learning how to work out conflict on his own.
Testosterone's pumping, and he's at the gym with the guys, and now he has a gun, and he's told, you have the right to use deadly force, and you're going to keep the world safe. And,
And that's why training is so important. I will tell you too, the psychological testing and background that goes on, it takes about a year to get hired as a police officer with the LAPD. There's an intense psychological testing and background, an intense background investigation. There are so many different policies and procedures put in place that we actually look at prior to us even saying you're fit, you're a good candidate to be a police officer. And so once you're selected and you've gone through that rigorous process, the physical process, the mental process of it all, and then you go through this training, you have a training officer. And that is really where you get grounded and learn the expectations of being a police peace officer. And we have a system, it's a team system, it's a training, management and evaluation system. So if you get into a certain amount of uses of force, an action item is triggered, and that supervisor has to look at your training, look at how many uses of force you've been in, audit your body-worn video, audit your community contacts, and then you sit down and you have a meeting with that supervisor. So not only do we have the training, we have the early warning Teams 2 system, we also have our body-worn cameras. Those are audited regularly. They're audited for contacts, they're audited for every single use of force incident. That body-worn video gets reviewed and assessed, and that officer always mandatory has some type of training related to that use of force. And then there's just the leadership of it all. If there's an officer that's exhibiting some behavior that's off, they seem angry, that sergeant is saying, how you doing? Are you having a bad day? Officers are human. A lot of times you'll find out my wife's going through cancer, My wife lost her job. I'm just having a bad day. And then now I have to come to work and respond to everybody else's bad day. So then we have a psychologist, department psychologist, and we have resources that we can refer that police officer to. So we really try to have this holistic approach of helping officers do the job that they signed up to do. It is very hard to see some of the things that we see on a daily basis. The mental health and well-being of our police officers is just as important.
So I'm going to show you guys two pieces of video. You'll be familiar with both of them, but I'll set up the context afterwards. I'm going to show them to you back to back, and then I'm going to ask you a question. So first, we're going to show you a piece of video from 1992. So let's watch this from 1992, which I think... And I remember being in college, being just so mortified watching that, seeing what could be. And now put up the George Floyd video for a second.
Bum right now. He enjoying that. He enjoying that. He enjoying that. Bum, bro. He enjoying that right now, bro. You could have put him in the car by now, bro. He's not resisting arrest or nothing.
So the question is, and why I'm showing those back to back, is surely you can realize that 1992 Rodney King and now 2020 with George Floyd, if you're black, especially if you're a black male, or if you have a black son, I have a black son, he's 5, and already there's no doubt that weighs on me heavily. You can understand why people do not stop and say, oh, but that wasn't LAPD this time. That wasn't, that was a rogue cop there. People don't know. I don't know. So what would you say to anyone who looks at those two videos and says, man, no, nothing's changed. If anything, maybe we're going backwards.
I understand people who feel and see that. I remember some years back when we first got our body-worn videos, Chief Charlie Beck made the comment, just like the war, is America ready to see this video in the comfort of their homes? Are they ready to see what really goes on and happens during some of these critical incidents and encounters? And once we release that and we do that, are we going to be ready to respond to what people's feelings based upon what they see? And looking at a video like that, it's going to jar your heart, your mind. It's going to make you angry. It's going to make you sad. And there's a lot about that video that isn't seen, that isn't told. And that goes back to the beginning when I talked about balance and having the information and communicating and taking enough time to sit down and hear the entire story. And when you take a 2-minute video after a 30-minute confrontation, you don't have the entire story. You have a view. And that view that you have is probably one of the worst views that you can see. And so when people say nothing's changed, my son's 20, he's black, he's a football player. Just before he left to go to college, he was exercising with 4 other black football players less than 3 minutes from my house. And they were in their workout gear and they were running up and down a hill, and someone didn't like the way they looked, so they called the police. So the police came and his friends were freaked out, and his friend says, well, he lives close to here. And so the officer goes up to my son and he says, where do you live? And my son says, down the street. And he says, do you have your ID? He said, yes, ma'am. I'm going to go to my car and get it, ma'am. Is it okay? It's in my glove box, ma'am. So the officer went with him and he said, do you mind? Can I open up the glove box, ma'am? And he got his ID and she asked him, are you on parole or probation? My son said, no, ma'am, I'm neither. So they had this exchange and the officer said, you were so kind and cooperative. Thank you. for your attitude and thank you for your cooperation. My son never said my mom's a police officer, my stepdad's a police officer, my dad's a police officer. He never mentioned that. And the officer apologized to my son and said, I'm sorry somebody called on you and we had to be here. You guys finished doing your exercise. There's a whole nother thing that is not being talked about. A police officer responds to an incident because somebody called. Somebody called and said something isn't right. Somebody called and said someone's in my store doing vandalism. Someone just robbed me. Someone's husband is beating his wife. Some kid just ran away. And we're responding in the mix of chaos or someone being victimized or an incident that just happened. And so my son's response is what I taught him. I taught my son, you don't run away, you don't talk back, you cooperate. And when you cooperate, you are de-escalating the situation yourself. You have to be responsible for your actions. You don't get to run away from a police officer when they tell you to stop. You answer their questions, you be respectful, you keep your hands where they can see them so that you make it out okay. What was really compelling about that incident that happened to my son a few weeks ago, he was more hurt that someone in the community felt he didn't belong. And that they felt he didn't belong, that they called the police on him.
But I have to ask you this, and you know, I think you did a great job, obviously, raising your son, and we all, you know, want our kids to be polite and respectful, and mine are at an age where I just, you know, want them to, you know, not eat sugary crap and you know, and hopefully stop pooping in diapers before I'm working at Walmart to pay for them. So we're all at different stages, but, and I didn't mean to take a very serious topic a different way, but sort of a different stage. But as you're describing that, I have to tell you, the thing that went through my mind, and it goes through so many others, is, yeah, but why should a black male have to be so polite and proper, or have a much higher significant risk, a lot of people feel, I do as well, of being shot or some type of harm happening, whereas we have all seen examples of, you know, white punks being rude, disrespectful. I guarantee you, white kids being pulled over in Beverly Hills and Bel Air, whose parents are living in $20 million mansions, are not saying yes ma'am, no ma'am, and so on. And none of them ever have a fear of being shot or being accused of not responding to orders. So that there's a problem there. I'm sure you would agree.
So I'm a Brady Bunch family, and I have 4 white stepkids who also understand both sides, and I have the same conversation with them. They've gotten pulled over, and I've told them, you be respectful to the police officer. And these are my brown-haired, blue-eyed, green-eyed stepkids who I love just like my own kids. And we have the same type of conversations. Every household should teach their kids, period, to have respect. That's just period. That's parenting. The fear. So I just said, I've got 26 years on. I've never been in an officer involved shooting. And I've worked South LA almost my entire career in some of the most dangerous communities in this city, almost in this country. And I have not used my weapon or shot anyone. So again, we have to be balanced. We have 1.5 million contacts a year within the LAPD. We're at our lowest number of officer-involved shootings in the history of our organization. I think we're at 22 or
like 22.
20, I'm not sure the exact number.
But it's low.
But when you look at 1.5 million contacts, and I'm not saying that an officer-involved shooting is tragic within itself. It's tragic for the police officer, it's tragic for the individual that's involved, and it's tragic for that family. No one wakes up or becomes a police officer and says, I'm gonna go get in an officer-involved shooting today. They don't. What we really have to think about is, why are these incidents happening? And what other systems do we have within our society that are broken to address this? I've talked about the reentry system, people coming out of prison but not having a resource to help them get along so they don't have to resort back to selling drugs or breaking the law. What can we do to receive them back into community so that they can be successful, right? Our probation system, does a 12-year-old deserve to go to jail for stealing $20 worth of stuff so he could brush his teeth and have deodorant and try to get some food for his family? Where are our systems broken that we can look at? Right now, the LAPD is the answer to everything. We're the only 24 hours, 7 days a week that responds to the cat in the tree, the conflict, the domestic violence, the homeless, the shooting in progress, the robbery, the mental illness, 911. It's all left on our shoulders. When you talk about defunding, do we need to reallocate funds to help us when we respond and answer the call of service? Absolutely. More money needs to go into our homeless, our mental health system. We need to readjust our probation system, our reentry system. When we have to shoulder all of society's ills, there's gonna be a clash with no resource to support us. And so we have to get better at our interactions. We can't be fearful of the community so much to where we reach for a gun rather than use our mouths to have a conversation with someone. We have to humanize each other, and we have to work alongside our systems to make things better, to lessen our encounters with people that do have mental illness or post-traumatic stress.
I want to ask Adrian a question, because you're a mom, you have young children, but you also have siblings, and you shared prior that you have a brother who's Black. What is your take on when I was asking a question and the deputy chief was answering it about, I was saying essentially that a white person being pulled over, especially a male, or being approached for whatever reason, is in my opinion, going to be treated very differently in a large number of cases, more favorably than an example of Deputy Chief's son, and what we see and hear a lot about. What is your take on that? I know I'm sure you believe in being respectful, but
absolutely. And so I'm adopted. I have two adopted brothers. One is Black, one is Caucasian, and obviously I'm Hispanic. Two white parents, all raised same household and everything, but of course all of us have very different experiences. And I was talking to my brother recently, and he's been in situations for sure where he's been categorized. My brother who's Black, yeah. And
he's large. I mean, and I'm saying he's bigger than me.
Yeah.
So already now he's a very large Black male.
For sure. And something that's just, as harmless as, he said he'll be walking down the street alone, after a bar or whatever, and sees a woman on one side of the street and she crosses the street. Not on the same street. So it's
to get away from him.
Yeah.
She fears that.
And he's kind of like, But, so you have to have an understanding of, your surroundings. And so he's very aware of this is the world, unfortunately, that we live in, with people who think, a certain way about race. But no, of course, he's always very respectful. I think at a certain point in time, he actually wanted to get into law enforcement. But it's hard because you see videos, the media, I think, is really not in favor of the law enforcement right now, to be quite honest. Everything I'm seeing is just horrific. But, you see these videos of officers simply trying to do their jobs, and they're not being respected. They're not, there's total disrespect, actually, and basically the opposite. And you kind of understand, because they're seeing videos of like a George Floyd situation, and they're trying to protect themselves and protect their children and whatnot. But then at the other side, just like you said, Deputy Chief, you have to de-escalate. You have to come together. You have to communicate. Otherwise, you're both fighting, and there is no, what's the plan here? So it's very difficult, I think, on both sides. But
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, talking about communication and having the discussions that are not that easy to have for people is not everything is going to be solved overnight, meaning even if we could universally all agree, and I don't think we're close to that in the world, but it would be good if we could agree that, yes, looking a certain way, being darker, being male is going to put you in an unfair situation for a lot of situations that may make negative assumptions about your intentions that are very unfair. No one has a magic wand. That's a whole separate way to say we got to address that. We have to address that. It's not going to be resolved overnight, but if we can at least get everyone to start out by saying that's a problem, it's freaking wrong to the highest level, that's at the core, we have to fix that. But separately, in the meantime, while that's happening, it's not happening at the moment, but if we can get that going, to your point, you're married to an officer who I happen to know and is one of the most loving, caring people there are. Many wonderful black cops as well, and of all different races, have to deal, and white cops as well, of course, deal with something where, let's look at the video that we have of what any officer in uniform, whatever color or gender or anything else, has to deal with every single day on the job. And I think people don't see this enough and lose sight of this reality. I know this is one of your biggest fears in life every day. So, and this was just a few weeks ago, but 10 days ago. This guy just walks into the police station. And this is body camera footage of the officer. So this guy just attacks him out of nowhere, then manages to get away the officer's gun.
Well, thank God he's alive and he's doing better now, thank goodness. But this happened just about 2 miles from our house. Have you guys seen this video?
Yeah, we have. And what I was telling the chief is that, you know, I don't know if you guys know, but the officer is Black. And one of the things, to the point that you guys are making, is that, and what the chief said, it starts in the home on both sides. Also, reverence for the law is not just one of the LAPD's core values, but it's also one of our management principles. And we are held to that standard. And I know that we have a lot of work to do to gain the trust of the community and the public in general again, but it works both ways. And reverence for the law should not just apply to police officers. That's what gets us, you know, to locations when we're called for service to begin with, is that somebody is breaking the law. So that's just one of the many variables that we have to contend with. Look at that officer that was in the video you showed us. He was doing his job. He handled it very well. But do you know what he goes home to his family with? We can't even imagine. That's never happened to me. I can't even say that I know what he was feeling. But he has to carry that with him to the next incident where he's treated like that. So the same trauma that impacts the community, that comes in contact with officers that treat them less than professional, is trauma on both sides. And which is, I go back to my original statement about CSP and getting to know the community on a different level, because we're going to learn about culture. We're going to learn about diversity in thought. We're going to learn about their family. We're going to learn about their struggles. And hopefully our officers will open up to them too and talk about, you know, because that is a very healthy exchange when both sides can talk about perceptions. Even if they're not kind at the time, we should be respectful enough to just listen. And we expect our officers to do that, is listen, even if they don't like what's being told to them.
You know, Captain Espinoza said something that just triggered a thought. So the CSP program it's going on a decade. And UCLA did a study of the program, and they looked at 2 out of our 10 sites. And they did the study in Nickerson Gardens in Watts and Ramona Gardens in East LA. And they came with 45 recommendations after this assessment. And what they found overall was that the CSP program built trust and relationships through reconciliation and forgiveness, and that it also had a reduction in crime and violent crime. But it also found that the CSP program made officers safer because they have relationships with the individuals in the community. They all know who their officers are, and there was less confrontation and people wanting to do right because there was a relationship there. So not only is it a trust building program, it also makes it safe for the community and the officers.
We chose the 4 clips that we showed today very specifically. And when you think of those 4 clips, it's pretty interesting because what each of them in isolation shows is pretty horrifying. And can really, when you say, how are we in a situation where tensions are so inflamed, it's like gasoline is being thrown on it every day. How do we start to talk and have a meaningful way of moving something forward like what you guys are doing with the community safety program? And if you think of those videos, well, if you watch the Rodney King video, as most people have seen at this point, unless they're too young to have seen it, and you're watching, you know, a large group of white cops mercilessly beating a black man who's down with clubs, it is a very searing image. You know, we saw, you know, the landing on the moon, totally different topic. It's something you do not forget and that lasts forever and is burned in your head. And in this case, something that is going to leave a very lasting impression, not a good one, especially if you're black. We're looking at the George Floyd video that we showed, you know, the knee in the throat for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. There is a lot of things that can come from that and have from riots and protests and things need to come from that. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but then we are looking at 2 specific video clips of, one, an officer working a desk at a Harbor City station, and a black officer, and some crazy person comes in off the street. I don't know if he's crazy, and I mean crazy, yeah, I don't know if he's been diagnosed as crazy. I know thankfully he was caught, and attacks the man for seemingly no reason. They've not released any motive yet, if there even is one. And the other video that we were watching, which was the black officer during the protests, who probably the bravest person I've seen on TV in any of the protests in quite some time, standing there holding his position and being berated, taunted by black protesters. And he's a black officer standing there holding the line, you know. So any of those in isolation or without any level of let's have a conversation, we know we've got a big problem. None of those things should be happening. Mm-hmm. You know, I think as long as you can agree that none of those things should be happening in any of those 4 videos, then that's more than enough people to sit at the table of humanity, yes, and really move some things forward and make a change, which is what you guys are doing with the community safety program. So I give you a ton of credit. I want to give you guys the last word for today on your community safety program, what's next for that program, and really what you hope to see, which you clearly are part of any solution that hopefully is coming.
It's so refreshing to be able to sit and have this conversation and talk about, like they say, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and not defend it, but uphold it and try to understand it and move past it. And some might say, well, I can't believe that chief just said move past it. What I mean from move past it is come up with a solution so that we can get through this to avoid it happening again. And you had made mention, Drew, that people keep saying it keeps happening over and over and over and over and over again. And it does feel that way. But if you don't stop and look back at where you came from and identify how far you've come, then you're not going to ever get ahead. Mm-hmm. And we have come a long way. We just celebrated the anniversary of women being able to vote, right? Slavery ended long ago, but not that long ago. There used to be a time where blacks couldn't even buy a house in the city of LA, and there were these invisible racism lines in our community. And so that was so long ago, but not so long ago. And when we talk about policing, when we talk about these devastating incidents, we have to remember that they come from a system that is broken, that needs to be fixed. And the police can't be the only answer to fix it. And anger can't be the only answer to fix it. We sat at the table today, the four of us, and we had some huge discussions. And we even talked about our personal lives. And that's what it takes to make change. We got to have a voice, and we got to try to change the systems. But everybody has to have a responsibility in that. And so this program, the CSP program, it's really about having a public health approach to making change, reducing incidents of fear, and creating these relationships to better ourselves and better our communities. And my wish as we move forward is that more people are willing to sit down at the table and not go against each other, but sit down at the table and let's have some hurtful, hard conversations. And let's make sure that it's inclusive of everyone to do that.
Very well said. Do you want to add anything, Captain Espinoza?
I think that the CSP program, I think it speaks volumes of the confidence in our department to put people into these communities that have traditional resistance to police or not good relationships with police and areas of high crime. So I think that that speaks volumes of the efforts our department, we can only speak for our department, has been making for years, because CSP is not new. As the chief said, she built that in 2011. And even at that point, there was already that confidence that we could go into these difficult communities and make a difference. And I believe we have. And I hope to be leaders in this effort of national policing in a way that includes the community, that includes how they want to be policed, with the understanding that that puts a lot of responsibility on their shoulders, and that reverence for the law goes both ways.
What would you say to your fellow officers who may be going through a difficult time through all this, maybe discouraged, maybe disheartened with everything that's going on? And then the second part of that question is same question, but what would you say to your community?
What I would say to my officers, and I think Captain Espinoza and I do this every day, we practice it every day, is hope. And for them to self-reflect on the reason why they're here and why they made the decision to put their lives on the line for someone that they don't know. And to always hold on to that feeling that they had when they made the decision to become a Los Angeles Police Department officer. And then to remember that training and the fear that their families had, but supported them in making that decision to choose this career. The second thing I tell them is listen to the community. They need you. 911 is their lifeline to you. Don't lose sight that your job is to serve and protect that community. Third, I tell them to be prideful, to understand not everybody can do this job, and that it's a decision you make because you want to make a change and a difference in someone else's life. We will get through this. It is difficult. I tell them to understand the hurt, apologize if necessary for something that we didn't do, but someone else may have done. Because if we get that forgiveness and understanding, we'll have a breakthrough and we'll be able to make huge change in our communities. We also tell them that we love them and that they need to take care of themselves. They need to ensure that they're mentally, emotionally, and spiritually sound and ready to respond to other people's needs. I think the community, and we do a lot of talk with the community, there's a reason why this program doesn't have the word police in it. The Community Safety Partnership Program is the community's program. We did research, we did surveys, LAPD thought outside of the box, and we let experts tell us what we needed to do to create a foundation to make change in a community. I tell the community, continue to hold us accountable. Continue to tell us what you need in your community. Continue to tell us how you want us to work and police in your communities. Just please remain open-minded, and when you're angry, let's sit at the table and have these hard discussions. And in turn, when you hold law enforcement accountable, law enforcement can hold the community accountable, and we can do that with respect and humanization for one another.
Very well said.
Very well.
Very well said. Thank you both for being with us. And, you know, our greatest prayer obviously is for the safety of everyone in uniform, and obviously everyone on the streets as well. Nobody sane wants to see innocent people harmed by anyone, let alone the people we expect to serve and protect us. And of course we want to see the safety for all of those wonderful people who genuinely do want to serve and protect us. So we thank you, and God bless you and everyone over at the LAPD.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, guys.